Before we begin, remember, this is a fictional story crafted from imagination, not reality. All characters are adults, and every relationship depicted is consensual. This is a space for dark romance, where shadows and desire intertwine. Step carefully and enjoy the story. The scream had been silent for 17 years. Lyren heard it anyway, trapped beneath the melody she scrubbed from the Starfall Hall's marble floors. A voice without sound, woven into the grain of stone itself, crying out in a language older than words. Most servants passed over it without notice. The castle sang with thousands of forgotten voices, and learning not to listen was how you survived service in the Citadel of Vaelis. But Lyren had never learned how to stop listening. She was kneeling in the east corner when the harmony shifted. The wordless scream became a plea, threaded through with desperation so raw it made her hands shake against the brush. Someone was calling for help. Someone close. Someone beneath her feet. Lyren pressed her palm flat against the floor. The marble was cold, but underneath she felt warmth. A pulse. A heartbeat that shouldn't exist in stone. The wall tapestry rippled as if touched by wind, though every window was sealed. Behind the woven image of the 3 crowns, a seam appeared in the stone. Not a crack. A doorway. Lyren's breath caught. In 17 years of service, she had cleaned this hall 600 times. She knew every scratch, every imperfection, every shadow. There had never been a door. The silent scream grew louder, not in volume but in presence, filling her mind until she couldn't think past it. Someone was dying down there. Someone who had been dying for a very long time. She should have left. Should have replaced the tapestry, finished her shift, returned to the servants' quarters, and buried the memory where all dangerous knowledge went to die. Lyren had survived this long by being invisible, by asking no questions, by existing in the spaces between other people's attention. But the voice beneath the floor was a child's voice, and Lyren had been a child once too, when they'd dragged her from her burning village and sold her to the Citadel for the price of bread. She pulled the tapestry aside. The door swung open at her touch, revealing stairs that spiraled down into darkness so complete it felt like falling. Lyren's gift flared to life unbidden, painting the shadows with threads of silver light that only she could see. Every stone held a memory. Every step down was layered with the echoes of someone's passage, years or centuries ago, their fear still clinging to the walls like frost. The air grew colder with each descending step. By the time she reached the bottom, her breath came in white clouds, and the silence was so thick it pressed against her eardrums like water. The chamber at the base of the stairs was circular, carved from black stone that drank the light. In the center sat an iron cage, barely large enough for a child to stand. Inside, curled against the bars with her knees drawn to her chest, was a girl. She looked up as Lyren approached, and her eyes were wrong. Not the color, not the shape, but the light inside them. Silver threads wound through her irises like veins of starlight, and when she blinked, Lyren saw galaxies folding in on themselves behind her lids. "You can hear me," the girl whispered. Her voice was hoarse, cracked from disuse, but underneath it ran a melody that made Lyren's bones ache with recognition. This was the source of the silent scream. This was the voice woven into the stone. "Who are you?" Lyren knelt beside the cage, her gift reaching out automatically to touch the girl's song. What she found made her recoil. The child's melody was fractured, broken into pieces and scattered across 17 years of silence. Someone had tried to smother her voice, tried and almost succeeded. "My name is Nysera," the girl said. "I am the daughter of the Starcrown Queen, and the woman who put me here is about to kill you." The voice came from the stairs behind Lyren, smooth as silk pulled over a blade. How remarkable. I wondered when one of the servants would finally hear through my wards. Lyren turned slowly. Standing at the base of the stairs, flanked by 6 guards in midnight blue armor, was Counselor Valkaris, the Queen's hand, the woman who ruled the Citadel in the Starcrown's absence. She was beautiful in the way winter was beautiful, cold and sharp and merciless. Her hair fell in waves of black silk, and her gown was the color of deep water. Rings adorned every finger, each one carved with runes that pulsed with faint crimson light. "A Songweaver," Valkaris said, studying Lyren with the detached interest of someone examining an insect. "How delightfully ironic. Tell me, little maid, how long have you been able to hear the dead?" Lyren's throat closed. Songweavers were forbidden in the Citadel, had been forbidden since the Silence Wars, when they'd torn the realm apart with music that could rewrite reality. Anyone caught with the gift was executed. No trial, no mercy. "She's not dead," Lyren said quietly, her eyes flicking to the cage. "You've been keeping a child prisoner." "A child." Valkaris' smile didn't reach her eyes. "You have no idea what you're looking at, do you? That creature in the cage is the last living heir to the Starcrown throne, the Queen's only daughter, the one person standing between me and absolute power." She descended the final steps, her guards moving with her like extensions of her shadow. "When Nysera was 4 years old, I arranged an accident. A fire during her tutoring session. The entire wing burned. They found a body, burned beyond recognition. The Queen wept, the realm mourned, and I became indispensable." Inside the cage, Nysera's hands clenched into fists. The silver threads in her eyes flared brighter. "You murdered a child to take her place," Lyren said. "And you've kept the real princess alive as insurance." "Insurance implies uncertainty." Valkaris tilted her head. "I kept her alive because killing the last heir to the Starcrown line would have destabilized the realm. But alive and silent, locked away where no one would ever find her, that was perfect. The Queen grieves a dead daughter while I consolidate power. And when the time comes to claim the throne myself, there will be no one left to oppose me." The guards closed in around Lyren. She was unarmed, untrained, a servant girl with a forbidden gift and no allies. There was no escape, no clever plan, no hope. But Lyren had spent her life listening to voices no one else could hear, and in that moment she heard something new. Not from Nysera, not from the stones, from herself. A song, buried deep in her chest, waiting 17 years to be sung. "You're right," Lyren said softly. "I am a Songweaver, and you've just made a fatal mistake." She opened her mouth and sang. The note that left her throat wasn't music. It was pure will given voice, a frequency that bypassed ears and struck directly at the fabric of reality. The guards froze mid-step, their armor vibrating in resonance. The cage around Nysera began to crack, hairline fractures spreading across the iron bars like lightning frozen in metal. Velkaris's eyes widened. She raised her hands, runes flaring to life across her fingers. But Lyren's song was already inside her defenses. The sound wrapped around the counselor's wards and pulled them apart like threads from a tapestry. "Impossible," Velkaris gasped. "You're untrained. You shouldn't be able to." Lyren changed the note. The cage shattered, iron bars exploding outward in a spray of metal shards that hung suspended in midair, caught in the web of her song. Nysera stumbled free, her own voice joining Lyren's in harmony. Where Lyren's song was raw power, Nysera's was precision, a blade made of starlight that cut through the darkness like dawn breaking. Together, their voices became a storm. The chamber walls cracked. The guards fell to their knees, hands pressed over their ears, though the sound wasn't something ears could protect against. Velkaris screamed, her carefully constructed composure shattering as the full weight of two Songweavers' combined will crashed down on her like a tidal wave. "Enough!" The word tore from Velkaris's throat, and she threw up both hands in a gesture of surrender. Lyren let the song fade, though the echoes of it continued to reverberate through the stone. Nysera stepped forward, her silver-threaded eyes fixed on the woman who had stolen her childhood. 17 years, Nysera said quietly. 17 years in the dark, because you were too cowardly to earn power honestly. Velkaris's lips curled into a sneer. You think the realm will welcome you back? A princess who disappeared as a child and returns as a Songweaver? They'll burn you for witchcraft before they believe your story. Then let them try, Nysera said. But first, they're going to hear the truth. She looked at Lyren, and in that moment an understanding passed between them that needed no words. Two Songweavers, two voices that had been silenced by different means, now bound together by a harmony that could shake thrones. "What's your name?" Nysera asked. "Lyren." "Lyren," Nysera repeated, as if testing the weight of it. "Will you help me take back my kingdom?" Lyren looked at the shattered cage, at the guards still kneeling in stunned silence, at Velkaris with her perfect mask finally cracked beyond repair. She thought of 17 years spent invisible, voiceless, erased. "Yes," she said. The Citadel of Vaelis had never seen a trial like the one that assembled at dawn. The grand hall filled with every noble, advisor, and ranking official who could be summoned on an hour's notice. They came expecting scandal, perhaps a theft, maybe an assassination attempt. What they found was a Songweaver servant girl and a ghost standing beside the throne, while the Queen's most trusted advisor knelt in chains before them. The Starcrown Queen herself sat frozen on her throne, her face the color of ash. She stared at Nysera as if looking at a wound that had suddenly reopened after 17 years of scarring over. "Mother?" Nysera said. Her voice was soft, but it carried to every corner of the hall with the clarity of a bell. "I know you don't recognize me. How could you? I was 4 when Velkaris took me. But I remember you. I remember the song you used to sing when I couldn't sleep, the one about the stars coming down to dance." The Queen's hands trembled against the armrests of her throne. "Prove it!" someone shouted from the crowd. "Prove she's the princess and not some charlatan!" Nysera closed her eyes. When she opened them again, the silver threads had spread through her entire gaze, transforming her eyes into windows onto the night sky itself. She began to sing. The melody was the one her mother had sung to her as a child, but woven through it now was the full power of a songweaver's gift. As Nysera sang, the air itself began to shimmer. Phantom stars appeared overhead, swirling in patterns that matched the constellation on the Starcrown coat of arms. The ancient bloodline of the queens, the one that had ruled for 1,000 years, was written in starlight across the ceiling of the grand hall. Only someone with Starcrown blood could have called those stars. Everyone in the hall knew it. The queen rose from her throne on shaking legs. Tears streamed down her face as she descended the steps, her hands reaching out to touch the daughter she had mourned as dead. Nysera. It came out as a broken sob. My little star. My light. I thought you were gone. I was never gone, Nysera said. I was beneath your feet the entire time, screaming, and no one could hear me. No one except her. She turned to Lyren, who stood quietly at the edge of the dais, still wearing her servant's apron, still invisible to most of the nobles present. The queen's gaze followed her daughter's, landing on Lyren for the first time. You found her. I heard her, Lyren corrected quietly, and I went down. She's a songweaver, Valkaris spat from where she knelt in chains. Even now, defeated and exposed, her voice dripped with venom. A forbidden practitioner of the old magic. By law, she should be executed. The hall erupted in whispers. Songweavers had been outlawed for 3 centuries. The Silence Wars had left scars on the realm that still hadn't healed. Fear rippled through the assembled nobles like wind through wheat. Nysera stepped forward, placing herself between Lyren and the crowd. You want to talk about law? Let's talk about kidnapping the heir to the throne. Let's talk about 17 years of false mourning while the real princess starved in a cage. Let's talk about treason, attempted regicide, and conspiracy to usurp the crown. Her voice rose with each accusation, and the phantom stars overhead burned brighter. Lyren saved my life. She saved the throne. She saved this realm from being ruled by a monster. And if you condemn her for using the gift that made that possible, then you condemn me too. Silence fell over the hall, heavy and absolute. The queen looked at her daughter, then at Lyren, then at Valkaris kneeling in chains. When she spoke, her voice held the weight of 1,000 years of Starcrown rule. The law against songweavers was written to prevent the Silence Wars from ever happening again. But it was also written by people who feared what they didn't understand. She turned to face the assembled court. My daughter is alive because a songweaver heard her crying. The conspiracy that nearly destroyed our line was exposed because a servant girl refused to walk away from someone in pain. If that is what song weaving means, then perhaps it's time we reconsidered what we've forbidden. She extended her hand to Lyren. Rise. You are no longer a servant in this citadel. Lyren stared at the offered hand, her heart hammering. This was the Starcrown Queen, the ruler of the realm, and she was offering her hand to a nobody from a burned village who'd spent 17 years scrubbing floors. Slowly, Lyren reached out and took it. The queen pulled her to her feet and turned her to face the court. This woman is under my protection. Anyone who moves against her moves against the crown itself. Nysera stepped to Lyren's other side, her presence a silent affirmation of the bond they'd forged in the dark beneath the Starfall Hall. Together, the 3 of them stood before the assembled nobility, a queen, a lost princess, and a songweaver who had learned that sometimes the most powerful magic was simply refusing to look away. Valkaris was executed 3 days later, her final words a curse that no one heard because Lyren and Nysera together wove a silence around her so complete that even her scream died unborn. The investigation that followed her death uncovered a web of corruption that had been growing in the Citadel for decades. Guards who had been complicit in Nysera's imprisonment, advisors who had turned blind eyes to Valkaris' machinations, nobles who had profited from the chaos of a grieving queen. One by one, they were brought before the throne. One by one, they faced justice. And through it all, Lyren stood at Nysera's side, learning what it meant to be seen, to be heard, to exist in a space that wasn't the margins of someone else's story. The coronation took place on the first day of summer, when the stars hung low enough to touch and the air shimmered with heat. Nysera stood before the assembled realm, no longer a ghost or a prisoner, but the crown princess of Vaelis, heir to the Starcrown throne. The silver threads in her eyes had faded somewhat, settling into a constant soft glow that marked her as both songweaver and royal. But before the queen placed the crown on her daughter's head, Nysera turned to Lyren. "A princess needs advisors," she said. "People she can trust. People who will tell her the truth, even when it's hard to hear. People who will walk into the dark because someone is crying." She held out a silver circlet, smaller than the crown but no less significant. "Will you stand beside me, Lyren? Not as a servant, but as my voice, as the person who reminds me to listen to the songs no one else can hear." Lyren looked at the circlet, at the princess who had once been a prisoner, at the assembled crowd who weeks ago would have executed her for the gift she'd been born with. She thought of the girl she'd been, invisible and afraid, scrubbing floors while the world moved around her. She thought of the voice beneath the stone, crying for 17 years in the dark. She thought of the song she'd buried in her chest, the one that had waited all this time to be sung. "Yes," she said. The circlet settled on her head like it had always belonged there, and when Nysera took her hand, their voices rose together in harmony, a song of stars and darkness, of silence and sound, of two people who had found each other in the depths and climbed back into the light together. The realm had never heard anything like it, and they never would again, because this song belonged to only two people: a princess who had survived 17 years in a cage, and a songweaver who had refused to let her stay there. Years later, when scholars wrote the histories of the Starcrown line, they would mark this as the moment the Silence Wars truly ended, not with bloodshed and banishment, but with two voices joining in harmony. A reminder that the most dangerous magic wasn't the kind that rewrote reality, but the kind that made people stop, listen, and hear the voices they'd been taught to ignore. Lyren stood on the balcony of the Citadel one evening, watching the stars appear one by one as twilight deepened. Nysera joined her, their shoulders touching in comfortable silence. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you'd walked away that night?" Nysera asked. Lyren was quiet for a long moment, listening to the songs woven into the stones of the Citadel. Thousands of voices, thousands of stories, all layered on top of each other like a tapestry made of sound. "I don't think I could have," she said finally, "even if I'd wanted to. Your voice was calling, and I've never been able to stop listening." Nysera smiled, that quiet expression that held the weight of someone who had learned to find joy after years of darkness. "I'm glad you couldn't." They stood together as night fell over Vaelis, two songweavers who had found each other in the silence, and in finding each other, had given the realm permission to sing again. Somewhere beneath the Starfall Hall, in the chamber where an iron cage had once stood, the stones sang a new song, not of pain or imprisonment, but of liberation, of a scream that had finally been heard. And the marble floors that Lyren had scrubbed 600 times remembered the day a servant girl chose to listen instead of walk away, and in that choosing, saved a kingdom. If you're still here, I know you enjoyed that. Make sure you like and subscribe so you don't miss the next story. And leave me a comment. Where are you listening from? It means more than you think to see how far this reaches. I'll be waiting for you in the next one.